Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining me and welcome to the podcast. So, in today's session, we're going to be talking about how to improve your concentration, your focus, and as a result, natural kind of progression of that, your productivity as well, and how diet pertains to that as well. I am the clinical lead here at Redicare. Andy Shepherd is my name. So, nice to meet you if you haven't seen any of our stuff before. If you haven't, make sure and click the subscribe button. Always do the wrong side over here, and then the bell notification on the other side, because we cover loads of different topics every week. Really interesting stuff from motivation, neuroscience, stuff around Alzheimer's, dementia, type 2 diabetes, how to lose weight, all of that sort of stuff. So make sure you do subscribe and leave a comment and like if you don't mind. It really helps us. Okay, super. So what we're going to talk about today is how the brain works in a sense, as that relates to ketones, which are fats as a fuel source, and sugar as a fuel source. So we know now from the literature of the last number of years that sugar is a notoriously dangerous in a sense and also unstable fuel source for the brain. So this sort of 3 p.m. slump, which of course the mainstream kind of food industry has bought into, beat the 3 p.m. slump, avoid the 3 p.m. slump, you're not you when you're hungry. That is not normal human physiology. It's not normal to have a job where you sit and type and then at 3 o'clock be almost falling asleep and wondering what you were thinking and clicking onto Facebook because you can't concentrate. That's not normal. And that's known as glucose dysregulation. So this is really important to understand as a concept. Blood glucose dysregulation happens when you eat a food that is sugar or carbohydrate based. And these are essentially the same thing. Whether it's a can of Coke and a tub of ice cream or a big bowl of porridge and 2 scones, they're all going to boil down to sugar in the blood because all digestible carbohydrate is metabolized as blood glucose. So if you eat a high carb meal, and this is the 3 p.m. slump, you have the big bowl of pasta, or you have the big panini or whatever it is in wherever you go, and the cappuccino, you come back after your lunch, blood sugars go up. About 2 hours later, they go down. And when they go down, your brain says, why is my blood sugar level going low? I need more sugar. You get sugar cravings. And if you don't have the biscuit or the snack or whatever it is, you're staring at the computer screen, kind of phased out, wondering what's happened. So your brain is saying, the fuel source that we're running on at the moment, which we've identified because you put lots of it in, which is glucose, is running low. And until you get me more, I'm going to down-regulate my physiological processes. So what that means is your brain is saying, well, I'm used to having a big rush of sugar from carbohydrate and or sugar. That's gone low now. Please get me more or I'm not going to work properly. So it's this vicious cycle that propagates and goes on and on throughout the day. We see the same thing with sugar cravings and weight gain. If you eat a high carb, high sugar diet, you're basically stuck. You've got yourself, you're kind of a hamster on a wheel. You're just going on the same cycle that perpetuates as the day goes on. You eat the sugar and carbohydrate, blood sugars go up, they go back down. You get hungry and tired. That goes on all day long. And that has direct implications on your concentration and your focus. So I just want to share this for a second, because when we understand how the body works, we start to realize that we are inadvertently, if we do this kind of traditional way of eating this high carb, low fat diet that we've been told is a lot better for us over the last number of years, and I'm sure at this stage you'll know my views on that, we end up inadvertently eating huge amounts of sugar and carbohydrate, not necessarily pure sugar, but the carbohydrate, like we know now, very well established in the literature, boils down to sugar in the bloodstream. So if we get up in the morning and we have Cheerios, and you can swap in porridge for that, or cornflakes or Weetabix, it doesn't matter. If we have some milk with that and some orange juice, you're actually talking about 15 to 20 spoons of sugar in your blood equivalent there. Now, this is really important. I'm using the word equivalent intentionally. It's not that you had something that has 20 spoons of sugar in it, but a bowl of porridge, when fully digested, will leave you with the equivalent amount of about 15 or 16 spoons of sugar in your blood. So that's breakfast. We've shoved in 15, 16, 18, 19 spoons of sugar into our blood. We have a granola bar and a banana at lunch. That is 8 spoons of sugar at a minimum. In fact, it's probably more like 12 or 13. Lunch break, if we have, the sandwich or pasta or any of that sort of stuff, again, we're up to 16, 17 spoons of sugar. And I see this all the time, and I look at it with genuine compassion. But if I pull up outside a Spar or something like that at lunchtime, as I do sometimes after picking up the kids from school, I'll see often builders, but people around that area, there's work going on there at the moment. And I will see obvious metabolic syndrome and tired looking people. Metabolic syndrome, I just mean the kind of expanded waistline and that kind of pre-diabetic physiology. They're going in and they're coming out with, and you see it all the time, white roll with chicken in it and low fat mayonnaise, because heaven forbid full fat mayonnaise might make you fat. It doesn't. They're coming up with a bottle of Lucozade or Red Bull and something kind of sugary as well, like a bar of chocolate or a packet of crisps. And that's the normal thing to do in at least in the Western world, which is madness. Because when you look at what that actually puts into your blood, you're talking the equivalent of 30, 40 spoons of sugar. And then we wonder why in the States, for example, 48% of people are either pre-diabetic or diabetic. 48%. So there's so much sugar and carbohydrate going into our blood that it's almost normal to be pre-diabetic or diabetic. So we go along to dinner time. We have the pasta, the chicken, the potatoes. We load up on carbs again, and then we have a snack of a couple of biscuits. Now, if you look at that day, so previously we might look at that and think, well, that's low fat and it's relatively low calorie. It's not the end of the world. If you break down the net carbohydrate in that particular set of meals, net carbohydrate just means the amount of carbs versus fiber. The reason you take fiber out is that fiber doesn't actually enter the bloodstream. It's for the most part indigestible. So digestible carbohydrates, there are 320 grams. If you divide that number by 4, you'll get roughly spoons of sugar in your blood. And you're talking about the equivalent of 80 spoons of sugar in your blood, which is pretty staggering. Now, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is anytime you eat carbohydrate, it boils down to sugar in the blood. It creates high levels of sugar in the blood, and your brain performance will suffer as a result. Now, you also have indirect actions of a high sugar, high carbohydrate, or high glycemic load diet, in that it causes something known as systemic inflammation and oxidative stress. So what's really interesting is we've seen this in exercise as well more recently, not very well understood, but in exercise, what you'll see happening is that if you fuel the body on carbohydrates, your concentration and your focus, your visual acuity, your responsiveness time, your reactions are not as good as if you fuel yourself on ketones. So a lot of athletes are turning to ketogenic diets, low carb diets, in a movement referred to as train low, perform high, which means that you eat very little carbs most of the time, but you carb up a little bit for exercise, or fat adapted athletic performance, where you use almost exclusively fat as your energy source. And you see this having profound effects in terms of recovery, inflammation, and also reaction and responsiveness time during matches. So what happens is when you eat glucose, which is, again, this is really important to understand, glucose is the fuel source that the body and the brain can use. We don't require a lot of glucose. We certainly don't require any dietary carbohydrate for optimal human health. That's more than clear now from the literature. What tends to happen is if you have bread, rice, pasta, potatoes, cereal bars, frozen pizzas, Weetabix, all of that falls into the same category. Your blood sugar levels go high, and it indirectly causes systemic inflammation in the body, a lot of oxidative stress and what they call reactive oxygen species, and that has an impact on your brain. And this is very clearly illustrated in the link between type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, and neurological disorders of varying degrees. So there's a mechanism there that's very, very obvious. Your brain performance suffers when your blood sugar levels are on that roller coaster I was describing a minute ago, the up and down, up and down. But also, as your body starts to become insulin resistant, so basically, insulin resistance just means that your pancreas produces a lot of insulin, and at some point it breaks, the accelerator hits the floor instead of going back. Your body produces so much insulin that the cells and the muscles and internal organs say, I'm not going to respond to that anymore. Now, we call that type 2 diabetes. Type 3 diabetes, we call Alzheimer's. So where you get insulin resistance in the brain, where the brain is no longer able to uptake and efficiently use glucose as a fuel source, we refer to that as Alzheimer's. Now, interestingly, with Alzheimer's, the brain maintains the ability to use ketones as a fuel source. So this is why there's research ongoing at the moment, Johns Hopkins University, Yale, a couple of different very well-established and well-known, well-respected universities looking at Alzheimer's, and more specifically ketogenic diets and ketogenic supplements like MCT oil and ketone salts and esters as an adjunctive treatment or a standalone treatment for Alzheimer's. So glucose, so carbs and sugar, inflames your brain. So What we want to do is, if we can't use glucose efficiently for the brain, and we can't, it's not a good fuel source for the brain. The brain prefers ketones as a fuel source. We know this. So ketones are the fuel source we can use. So how do we use ketones as a fuel source? Well, first of all, you have to restrict the amount of dietary carbohydrate you're eating. So cut down or cut out on bread, rice, pasta, cereal, granola bars, all that sort of stuff. And then what you want to do is replace that with healthy fat and protein. So you might think, well, that all sounds very complicated. How am I going to do that without really overthinking it? A simple way to do it is restrict 95% of your shopping to the outskirts in a supermarket. So what I mean by the outskirts is, when my wife and myself and my two kids, Jamie and Sophie, if we go in, we do this nearly every day because we're not as organized as we should be. But if we go into a Super Value, Aldi, Lidl, wherever, we'll tend to shop around the outskirts. It's particularly good analogy for the likes of Super Value because of the way it's laid out. So the outskirts, you have meat, fish, dairy, so your butter and yogurts, and then on the other side, then you'll have your fruits and vegetables. That's where you should be doing 95% of your shopping. So I say jokingly, the inside aisles are trying to kill you. When you go into the inside aisles and you have the chocolate and the sweets and the crisps and the cereals and the breads and the granola bars and frozen pizzas, and the frozen section as a general rule, with the exception of vegetables, all of those foods are particularly harmful for you and for brain health. So we have this overwhelming body of evidence now that says that a low carb dietary protocol or a ketogenic protocol is anti-inflammatory for the brain, and more importantly, provides the brain with a stable fuel source that will keep your concentration and your focus going all day long with almost no blips. So I came from a background with, and I'm very open in talking about this, I've suffered from anxiety and depression and things like that on and off all my life, with the exception of the last 5 or 6 years, where, touch wood, I've had almost none. And one of the main reasons I feel for that was high carb, high sugar diet causing inflammation in the gut. The gut then has a connection to the brain directly through what's known as the vagal nerve or the vagus nerve. So where you have an inflamed gut and high blood sugar levels and lots of systemic inflammation in the body, it can travel up through the blood-brain barrier, which we know now is permeable, and all that inflammation can cross into the brain. Sometimes that's expressed as depression, anxiety, PTSD, alcoholism, lots of different things. ADHD, it has an implication in autism. So that inflammation passes over. For me, the game changer with my mental health and my concentration, my focus, and my productivity, massively so, was going on to a ketogenic diet, having things like bulletproof coffee in the mornings. I might put some butter and some coconut oil into my coffee and blend it and drink that, give my body a flood of fats. If I'm trying to do a really good productive day's work, like today now, for example, I have a lot to do, a lot of stuff that I just putting on myself that I want to get through. I'll fast. So I won't eat. I mightn't eat until 3 or 4 o'clock today, or whenever I've got most of the work done. And you'll find your focus goes way up. Now, that sounds counterintuitive. You might say, well, I thought you need food for energy. Not necessarily. You can derive really, really good energy from the body in the form of body fat if you teach the body how to burn fat for fuel. Again, by limiting dietary carbohydrate and simultaneously increasing healthy fat and protein. This is known as a metabolic adaptation. So I wanted to share this with you for a second. Before I do, let me just give you a little bit of a backdrop to this. This is looking at, so I know today we're talking about lighter stuff like concentration, focus, and productivity. But if we look at mental performance overall, the worst position you can be in from a mental performance point of view, almost without exception, maybe Alzheimer's as well, would be schizophrenia, manic depressive, or bipolar. They're some of the most devastating and debilitating illnesses anyone can suffer from. So if we look at how a ketogenic diet would affect them, if they show an improvement in symptoms, you would say, well, surely it can help with my productivity and concentration and focus and work. And this, I've covered this a couple of times, but it is just incredible, the results. This is a ketogenic diet, 28 patients identified in a hospital who in, Castelviel and Castelmaru in France. So 12 of these patients had bipolar disorder, 10 of them were schizophrenic, and 6 had major depression. So these were very, very, very ill, mentally ill patients. Put in a ketogenic diet, which is defined as less than 5% carbohydrates, 20% protein, 80% fat, in and around there. So a very high fat, moderate protein, low carb diet. So all the stuff, the meat, eggs, cheese, low sugar fruits and vegetables that we talk about on this channel, on this podcast, 43% of them achieved clinical remission. Now, to put that in perspective, that means that 43%, almost 1 in 2 patients with bipolar and schizophrenia, no longer met the diagnostic criteria for having bipolar or schizophrenia at the end of a 4-month intervention where all they did was change their diet. So we say things like, oh, you'll feel better if you eat better. But actually, you have a massive shift, a whole shift in the way your body utilizes fuel. And there's very little that's as important as your diet when it comes to your mental health and your productivity and your focus. And this is, I mean, there's no better illustration than this. 43% of patients with bipolar, major depression, and schizophrenia no longer had bipolar, major depression, or schizophrenia at the end of the 16-week intervention. 64% of them were discharged from this study where all they did was change their diet to ketogenic on less medication, and 100% of them had an improvement in symptoms. Now, I promise you from knowing the way these sort of things work that if you had a pharmacological agent that you could say 100% of patients with schizophrenia, bipolar, mental health, anxiety got much better, and 46% of them, or 43%, whatever the number is, no longer met the criteria for having bipolar or schizophrenia, that would be a blockbuster that anyone with the slightest bit of a mental health condition would be prescribed. Unfortunately, it's not. But the great news is it's just food. So this illustrates the power of food. And these sort of studies are the reason that we're so passionate about teaching people about insulin resistance, systemic inflammation, how the body works, and so on. So if you want to dramatically improve your concentration and your focus, dial down sugar in your diet. It doesn't matter if it's low calorie or it's called diet or it's marketed as healthy. Dial down the amount of sugar and carbohydrate in your diet. And at the same time, increase your eggs, your meats, your cheeses, your low sugar fruits and vegetables, your dark chocolate, your nuts, chia seeds, all that sort of stuff. You teach the body to use fat as its primary fuel source, which has a whole host of benefits, not least improving your concentration, your focus, your memory, your short-term and long-term potentiation, all of these sort of things. So hopefully that's helped and answered the question as to how can we get ourselves more productive just by changing our diet. Thanks for joining us, guys. Chloe will be back next week. I'll be back the week after. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell notification over on this side, and you'll get notified every time we go live. Have a good day and enjoy it. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.